How do you define impact?
I think we're more circular. I like this idea that impact is not a destination, it's a starting point.
But it also requires a long-term perspective.
Absolutely.
Because how do you convince the incumbents today?
You talk numbers, you talk data points. That's where the work needs to be done.
And where does that start?
Rather than showing images or creating a narrative that's all about sadness or,
Charity
we talk,
porn, yeah.
charity poor, right? We talk always about, we don't want to be with Project Margie. We don't want to be another venture that shows the despair. What we want to show is the opportunity. We want to show the lives touched.
Hayley Evans is a global entrepreneur, investor, and board director who has built a career turning commercial ventures into platforms for systemic, positive, global impact. She has led the expansion of an $8 billion human performance and healthcare ecosystem, scaled high-growth companies across technology and well-being, and pioneered new models of impact investing that challenge outdated philanthropic systems. Hayley is also an active member of YPO and a trusted advisor on the Project Margie board, and I am proud to call her a close friend.
This is Unboxing Impact, a series of conversations with people working at the intersection of business, capital, and social change. I am Sunil Lalvani, and my work spans international business and more than a decade building a social enterprise that delivers sustainable access to clean water across rural Africa. In this series, we explore what impact really means, the trade-offs and tensions involved, and how success should be defined beyond financial return.
Hayley Evans, welcome to Unboxing Impact.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So Hayley, we've been friends a long time. We met during COVID online and had the pleasure now, once you were out of lockdown from Australia, to finally meet. But we connected in the first place on the subject of impact, both YPOs, and it was the Impact Network people who connected us. Let's start with that. How do you define impact?
What a great question to start with, because this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. And for me, it's really dual ROI. And what I mean by that is it's impact or return for every stakeholder, and how we think about building things today, whether it be a business or a product, that is not just for immediate returns, but how we build a sustainable and profitable future moving forward. And I think why that is such a wonderful question for me is because I actually think the key to really changing the way we see impact in the world is through language. And we all have very different backgrounds. We have different interpretations and values around what impact can mean for us. And this is where I think the real opportunity is, because historically we have seen impact almost as a soft, nice to have. And I think where we're seeing in the world of business, we're seeing a shift. And that is, how do we take it from a bolt-on or a soft skill into something that's actually a growth driver, and something that is meaningful enough and quantifiable to prove that it's no longer a soft decision-making or strategy, it's actually a really strategic commercial decision.
Okay. Dive deeper into that, because I know, obviously, you sit on my board. You know I've spent my life chasing donations and trying to get people to understand this. But I keep coming across this brick wall of, when we talk about impact and impact investing, no, I must maximize financial return. Figure out the impact, but it mustn't be a compromise on financial return. But you see it differently to that.
I do, because I think in that mindset, it's a very linear mindset, i.e. X equals Y. And I don't think that's the world we live in. I think we're more circular, and how we think about where the starting point is. And I like this idea that impact is not a destination, it's a starting point. And where we have this outcome, and let's just talk profit, a financial a return. We have historically, and still do, define our strategies based on that bottom line.
Yes.
And we start there and then fill in the gaps as how to get there. And I actually think we either need to create it a circle or lead from reverse, or the other way. And that is, how do we think about changing the narrative of impact actually not being a cost, Because as soon as we think about the language of impact or, nice charitable ventures or doing good as a cost, we devalue what it could actually be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where there's a beautiful nuance because as business leaders and as investors and people who are passionate to create a better world, that doesn't have to be at a cost of profit, just to be clear. How do we actually use that impact related way or impact language to actually say, well, if you lead with impact, what are all of the financial returns that create value? And when we're talking about profit, it's not always revenue and cost. It's around how we create value that in turn turns to dollars. And I think that's where there's a really interesting conversation to be had.
And I agree with that. And I think that's I'm going to dive into a couple of things on that. But it also requires a long-term perspective.
Absolutely.
Right? Because so how, for example, you're going to sit with Jeff Bezos and tell him that this is the case,
Yeah.
screw what you're doing now, double your workers' salaries, and that's all going to be good for your bottom line at the end of the day. How do you convince the incumbents today? How do you convince financiers that are looking at short-term direct return on their financial investment to back ventures that might be more impact driven over the long term? How do you change that narrative? How do you convince people about that?
Yeah, I think it comes back to language and it's around creating quantifiable data points to enable them to see the return. And I think historically we have not had that, as in we've seen philanthropy or charity as a nice feel good thing to do, but we've never put numbers behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about financial investments, whether you're an investor or a high net worth and looking to put your money somewhere for return, you talk numbers, you talk data points.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I think if we start showing and providing data points to show the impact which leads to return or the outcome is financial return, that's where the work needs to be done.
And where does that start?
It starts with two ways. It starts with businesses
Mhm.
seeing the value and tracking the value of impact, i.e., by creating organizations that have a lens that promotes a narrative of positive impact. That in turn attracts the right people. It allows us to retain people in a certain way.
Mhm.
It allows customers to see our brand differently and may or may not have price flexibility and allow you to change your pricing model. And I think on the other side, it also is an opportunity for charitable or not-for-profit ventures to start using data to lead the narrative. So rather than showing images or creating a narrative that's all about sadness or,
Charity
we talk,
porn, yeah.
well, yeah, charity poor, right? We talk always about, we don't want to be with Project Margie. We don't want to be another venture that shows the despair. What we want to show is the opportunity. We want to show the lives touched. And I think that's something that we really need to work on because people actually people buy people buy emotion.
Mhm.
And I think when you sell in that way, you sell guilt.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's not only what that does is it relieves guilt of a person, but it doesn't make you a returning customer.
Yes.
It makes you a one one
Agreed.
and forget.
Yeah.
And I think if charities or not for profits start leading into innovation, if they start leading into data points and lead with that and prove, and I think to the other point with regards to an investment landscape is um, every product, and let's call it a product, has a different customer.
Yeah.
And you can't speak the same thing to each of those customers. You need to understand what they value, what the value return is going to be for them, and what the competitive advantage is and why you provide it.
Mhm.
And that should be no different for a charitable entity
Yep.
or a not for profit or a social enterprise. You lead into your customer's need and desire, and you create a better product than someone else.
So I buy into all of that
Mm.
and love the narrative. I love the way that you phrase it. And you talk about not only with conviction, but you've done it
Yeah.
in real life as well. But for me, the challenge is, I started Project Magi because I saw a desperate need. Okay, not any different than you would with a normal business. You see I hate to phrase it this way, but you see a market opportunity and you go after it. Now with Project Margie, the problem we were trying to solve, the economics of it necessitated we had to be a non-profit.
Yeah.
There is just no way that you can solve that problem with a profitable model, at least not to date. And then you have let's call them hybrid models, okay? That will need to be serving a social problem and a social cause, and might be able to make some financial return, but there will be a compromise. And then there's, let's call them the unicorns, okay, which perhaps can serve society and do a lot of good and make great financial returns. But unfortunately, what I see all the way along is that's happening. And you've got a few good companies. You've got Newman's Own, you've got Patagonia, you've got a few very, very good companies, big companies, that have managed to change this narrative and drive down this. But still, the vast majority, the 90+% of organizations are still driving at very, very much a profit at all costs mentality. Now, some of them will be, we've got to survive, okay, and that's perfectly fine. If you've got to make certain business decisions, financial decisions, because you've got to survive, okay, I can understand that. But then you've got the real behemoths in society, which are just deciding that the money is everything. And unfortunately, there are trillions of dollars of capital, okay, that are always going to be following that. And how do we move that narrative in a really big, significant way? And that means governmental interventions as well, to make sure that people are almost even forced to look at this new narrative, and not just a 1 or a 5% of investors to do that. How do we make that real paradigm shift in thinking?
And I loved what you said about government and policy, because for me, it starts with culture. And culture drives policy, culture drives decision making, and it drives commercial return. And I think it's no longer, to the point that I mentioned earlier, it's no longer linear. We as a society and business leaders and organizations need to take a stance and actually close the loop and actually change that. And it starts with policy, and you're 100% right. Because even when you sort of framed that question, there was a moment where you said, and I hate to say it, but it has to be this way.
Yeah.
But does it? We have historically believed that it had to be. And it's almost like, as a society, we wait for permission to change. But we actually are the permission, as leaders. And if you think about, am I saying this frivolously, as in it's an overnight, flick a switch, get a policy changed and everything is, fine and dandy? It's not. But there has to be a starting point. There has to be key organizations, which we're already seeing, doing this and proving to people that you can change. We're seeing governments make considerable, carbon credits. They're making considerable policy change to make sure that this is on the agenda. We're seeing consumers buy or use their wallet with values and impact related spends. So I don't think it's just one element of a business that is. It's an ecosystem that has to change. And I think we're seeing really positive movement towards that. And we are seeing the return of it. It will take time. That's the crappy part about it. But I think it's totally achievable, but it's not a one-hit wonder.
So first, I agree on that. Whatever change is going to take time. We're not going to have a revolution in terms of this model happening. Although I do worry the economic state we're in globally. I do worry where societies are going to go with this, because and this is the problem. There's a great TED talk, one of the very early ones I listened to on my Project Margie journey by a guy called Nick Hanover.
Yeah.
And it was called The Pitchforks Are Coming. And this guy's a billionaire from Seattle. And he stood up there and said, listen, as speaking in terms of the billionaire class, this is in our interest, because if we don't change something now, as we see history tells us, the pitchforks will come for us. So we better do something about this now, in our self-interest. Forget about society, just in our self-interest. We can't keep extracting the way that we are from society. But you're just seeing this problem exacerbate. That's why I get so frustrated about it, okay? Because you see this late-stage capitalism driving along really, really terrible wealth inequality. And you're leaving swathes of society almost with no choice. We're almost going back to the dark ages where you have coal factories and chimney sweeps and the haves and the have-nots. Almost to a level where I think you've got, well, people are so impoverished they have no choice. And of course, when we're talking about this, we're talking more about the Western world, anyways.
Absolutely.
Forget the global South and developing world who are struggling to survive anyway. But you're moving the wealthier societies back into those situations. So while I agree with the narrative and I love the direction and the positivity, and I don't want to make this a downer of a discussion. But what's going to cause that break? Is it one going to be a revolution? Is it going to be, if not revolution, but just an overthrow of the government? But what's going to make that massive shift in mindset for people and for governments to make that happen?
Yeah, I think it comes back to, and I agree with you, and I think it comes back to collective courage, policy again. And, particularly in times like we are in at the moment economically, it really lends into this culture of fear. And we lead with fear. And most importantly, we have this ideological view that wealth is scarce or opportunity, there's a scarcity around it. And so while we stay in a mindset of scarcity, we actually can't see abundance. And for me, and I can be very positive Polly on it, and that's why I've gone heavily down the data perspective, because I can go on and bang on about what I believe from a values perspective, but I also understand that that's my value set. But by providing outcomes and returns that have dollars attached to it, the subjectivity gets taken out of my comments, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, to your point, or to answer the question, is it's changing mindset. It's changing culture, and it's about creating a culture of abundance, because it doesn't have to be an and or game. It doesn't have to be profit and or purpose. They sort of can live harmoniously if we get it right. And if we change the sort of sentiment around impact being charity and a soft nice to have, and actually change that to how do we create it as a really profitable growth driver, but it's actually going to take people to have courage, and it's going to take people to stand up and maybe wear the cost of it at the very beginning to get a long-term growth. And I think that's also where the mindset changes, because it's not about what we do today. It's about what we do today plus. So is it purpose now, or is it purpose plus, or profit now, profit plus? And it's that long tail that we need to be thinking about.
So we jumped into this. I gave a short introduction before we started speaking. But in a couple of minutes, tell us who you are, your background, and more importantly, because you've got a very impressive background, commercial background, and how has that brought you to the position you are today in terms of having this view on impact?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. So my background is an interesting one. I've worked across multiple sectors, and people are often quite confused by that, because I don't really sit into a bucket. So I started very early on. I dropped out of uni, went backpacking for a little while, came back, finished a degree, and went into experiential marketing. And it's maybe an Australian term, but experiential marketing is, if you think about above the line with advertising, your TVs, radios, and the like, through the line, you've got your digital and the like, and then you have experiential, which is really on the ground, sampling, face value, getting immediate feedback from customers. So you might be at the Grand Prix and you get a sample of something. And I really lent into that. And the thing that I loved about it was all about getting a direct consumer feedback, but it was really understanding customer centricity. And what I learned from that is we can talk so much about what people want and what products we should have and what we should be doing, but now there is no better time than now to just ask. And the easiest path and the fastest path and the most cost-effective path is to ask people what they want and give it to them. And it's not that hard. Find out what someone wants and give it to them in a better way. So I did that for many years. I had my first exit at around 32. And I would love to say that it was, all talent and strategy, and I was incredibly clever. I wasn't. I was 32, and I winged it and blagged it, and luck and timing comes into it as well. And after that, my family has a very moderate registered training organization in the mining sector. And so, not knowing what to do at 32 and not having a job after all, I lent into that, and I really learned a lot in the mining sector. It was a time where females weren't necessarily a majority, and it was a very interesting culture at the time. To say that, though, I've had a remarkable experience within that sector. And I really lent into that and started to understand the problems of the mining sector, the problems from a remote working perspective, from a risk and governance, and sort of from a crisis emergency response perspective. So we've had that for 19 years. And one of the things that really needed to be enhanced to serve our customer was, how do we bring in innovation? How do we think about remote locations? How do we ensure that our workers are safe on a mine site that doesn't involve someone going and training them, on the risk matrix or soft skills? So I started to create innovative ways to deliver training and ensure that workers were safe on site, but also so the consumer of the worker was safe on site, but the customer, the mining client, could not only manage their governance and compliance and sort of financial insurances, they could actually ensure that they were investing in their human capital, which was another thing for me that I was incredibly curious about, because really seeing
That's an early dive into impact there, right?
absolutely, and I'll speak a lot, but I'll get to the point of how it led to impact. But from the customer centricity element of the marketing business to a mining business where human capital is so precious, not only is the gems that they're drilling, but human capital, this whole concept of how do we create impact through human performance really sparked my curiosity. And I am an eternally curious person, and someone who believes that investing in people is always going to be a good investment, which in turn leads to the impact element. I then, post that, had an unbelievable opportunity where I met a senior managing director of a group called the Tavistock Group, and they are a $14.5 billion private investment organisation, so 9 sectors, 15 countries. And I hadn't been in the financial sector at all. It wasn't really my world. It wasn't really something that I had strength in, to be quite honest. But this organisation was so unique in its approach and how it thought about investments, how it thought about almost like this circular idea. It wasn't just about financial return. And mind you, they deliver exceptional financial returns, but they really thought about every element in detail. And what I learned through that experience is, how do we think about the outcome as the starting point and reverse engineering every element of what that looks like? And I think creating that impact, looking at every element of that impact, has really made me then go, okay, so I've looked at it from an experience for consumer. I've looked at it from a safety and a driver of financial growth and compliance. And now I've got this beautiful circular sort of idea of, how do we piece it all together and not have to have this fragmented, I'll do a little bit here, but I have to have payoff here. How do I actually close the loop and have it all? And so that's sort of what led me very much into the impact space. One, because I've never really seen impact as just a nice to have. I've always seen it with this dual ROI mentality, and that's because of the investment into human capital.
Okay, but that's first of all, it's fascinating that, as you said, you've covered comms, you've covered people, you've covered finance. So I know that's where you help as a project manager, because you got, you know how everything works. Yeah. But that's quite unique, I guess, with Tavistock Group, I have to say, because again, having that holistic vision, which again is not common.
No.
So what drove it within Tavistock Group? Was it always there from day one, or was it something that they moved into, developed into?
Well, look, I think from my perspective and my time there, it was really about having a visionary leader and a leader who had courage. You know, Joe Lewis, the founder of Tavistock Group, is an extraordinary human. He thinks in a way that I've never seen before. And it was all, for him, he started from humble beginnings and he went into restaurants and then Forex trading and then created this ecosystem. Uh, but it was curiosity and courage that drove him and believing in investing in people and giving people a chance.
Mhm.
It wasn't just about ticking a box of a resume or who brought a certain skill set to what he needed. The other thing that I probably really learnt in that environment was as humans, and Dan Sullivan has a great book on this called Who Not How.
Mhm.
And this became really prevalent while I was at Tavistock. And that is, as humans, we actually ask the wrong question when we're faced with a problem.
Mhm.
And when we see a problem, instinctively, the first thing that we ask is, how do we solve it?
Yeah.
And what we do is we run around and we either try and fix it a certain way or we try and upskill ourselves to do it or solve it. And this whole idea of instead of asking, how do I solve it? What if we reframe the narrative? And it comes back to language. What if we reframed the narrative to who do we need or who do we have to help us solve it?
Mhm.
And it was that idea of collective thought. It was about coming together as a team. And coming back to that point that you mentioned earlier around, businesses now seeing this self mentality, i.e., I need to do this. I don't want to lean in because I've got my little patch that I need to get profitable or drive return on. And I think the beautiful thing about the Tavistock Group, it really showed me that it's not an I game. It's
Mhm.
actually a we game or a team game. And it might sound really cliched, but that's where it hit home. Because as soon as we started playing that game, financial return was not the initiative or the action item, it was the outcome.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
shift changed everything.
So again, just coming back, so that's a great example, and there are other examples, but again, too few and far between, especially at that kind of scale. You might find some odd local businesses that are able to do that because they're family owned, family run, and they just manage it within their society. A local restaurant chain might be giving back to the homeless or whatever they might be doing. But again, how do we bring that mindset shift to other huge organizations? How do we bring that shift to the financial markets, I guess?
Yeah.
Because all those trillions of dollars well, all businesses are competing for those same trillions of dollars. And the one that says, I'll give you, a 10x return is going to get the money over the 3x return.
Yeah.
And I get the point about data points. I think that's really important. Proof point is important. But I guess the bigger issue is the short termism behind it. Right.
Yeah.
Because if you can take a long enough time horizon, you can say, okay, over the 5 years, over the 10 years, I will give you a better return than these guys will give you. But money is not patient that way.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
how do we start to shift that narrative?
So I think, one thing that I'll challenge something that you just said, and that is, um, there's not a lot of businesses in the space that are doing this. There's, our big organizations that are changing the way. And there's little ones that are doing it, but it's not like a big part of what's happening in the business world today. And why I challenge it is I think there is a big part of the business community that is doing it. The challenge is we're not talking about it. We're not showcasing it.
Mhm.
Our media is not showcasing it.
Mhm.
Our governments are not showcasing it. And we're not telling the story of it because in the current landscape, it's not a story that
Yeah.
we think people want to
Yeah.
hear. And that's where, if we look at the um, emerging leader and this wealth transfer to the younger generation, skipping the 55-year-old to drop down to a 35-year-old emerging leader.
Yeah.
Two very, very different decision makers. And if we think about Gen Z, millennials, who are actually using their wallet to cause change and
Yeah.
impact, Financial markets, to answer your question with regards to how do we think about changing the narrative for financial markets, is it will change when they understand what their new consumer is looking for. And it's not just about one element of return. There's a dual element of return. And I think data points, understanding that consumer market, we need as a voice from a policy, a government and a media perspective to start challenging ideas that are in our society at the moment that encourages a scarcity mentality, that encourages this, charity is soft, it's not profitable, and come back to reality, because I think we have been so brainwashed to think a certain way and we're so climatized to think that certain way that no one's challenging it. And collectively, we need to challenge it. We need to change it from an I mentality to a we or a team, and kind of have some balls and get up and have our voices be heard.
Yeah.
Our media needs to allow those voices to be heard as well.
So I agree with that. Hence, we do this podcast, right? To at least get the discussion out there and have people talking about it, because I think you're right. People don't want to talk about it. People don't like going against the grain. They don't be the first ones out there. So I think it's important we have our voices heard. But again, the problem is, look, I support everything you're saying. Okay,
Of course you do.
I think it's fantastic. But you know what frustrates me is we're going against the rising tide, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point, how do we communicate it more, and how do we make sure that the message goes out there and people buy onto this? And I think the challenge is with this wealth transfer that not that you talk about, it's correct, but that you're mentioning, it's a massive wealth transfer, and I hope that will drive a certain amount of change. But again, we're still talking about a minority of global society. And the other problem is, which we have today, and I don't know what the answer is today, but okay, if you want to take conspiracy theory, but we have a society that's built, that's structured us this way, where there is a demand and even a need now for really cheap product to keep society ticking over, cheap food and cheap resources and cheap trainers and cheap clothes and things like that, and that drives a vicious circle in terms of, because we could always say, okay, look, fine, let's improve all these situations,
to the bottom, right?
Yeah, and let's start paying farmers more and stop all the child labor camps in terms of making trainers. But then now consumers can't buy $20 trainers; they can buy $300 trainers. And I don't think ever we should be putting, not ever, but I don't think the burden of making change should be on the consumer anyway. I think it's got to be on the corporates to be offering the right product. But we get ourselves into this almost vicious cycle. Is that how do you end up running businesses at a global level, or organizations that can tackle both situations?
And I think it's a really interesting one, because I don't necessarily think it's a top-down approach. I think it's a bottom-up. And so if you want to change culture, if you want to change or define, and let's talk about the product example for the organizations, if you actually want to define what a good product is, then your consumer is actually going to drive that product and the pricing of it. And so we talk about cost, but we don't always talk about cost and value, and they're two very different things, and both drive pricing. And I think when it comes back to creating products, we are in a world where those type of industries, the price sensitive, race to the bottom sort of thing, is because we're still in this mindset of we want to beat someone else. There's actually enough wealth in the world to be able to share, collectively have that. But we have to get enough people driving the change, and it actually comes at a consumer level.
How?
So consumers are like, if you stop, but like if you actually have a consumer that values something and makes a conscious choice. So we're seeing this a lot in today's society around conscious buying. We're seeing people who, and look, in not always a positive way, we've seen greenwashing, whitewashing, all of these things where people have gone, oh, wait a minute. People buy emotion, people buy feeling, people buy values. It's how we choose where we want to work, where we want to live, all of those things. So the power of the consumer is incredible and often overlooked. right? And I think where um, the education is huge. If we think about emerging leaders, all of these sort of young people who do value that, and are making very conscious decisions with regards to purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at, and I think there's a statistic or, a timeline of, 20 years ago, if you look at the stock exchange and you look at all of the product led businesses that topped, 1 to 10. And if you look at it now, we've moved to a service based
Yeah.
model. So the value set's changing. And that has been because people are now valuing services and experience more than they do a product. And that's sort of the idea of what I'm trying to say of consumers are actually driving that change, not a product or a company saying this is what you have to buy.
But does it, so I agree. I agree to a degree.
Mm.
But again, it comes to me in terms of I'm going to say the fortunate few consumers who can make that decision. It's a terrible slogan, but in the UK, they talk about it's more than it's okay. Poverty levels are rising in the UK. That's the most polite way I could put it. And there's a slogan about heat or eat. As we get into winter, you got the older population and more than that, and it's literally a choice: do I switch on the heating
Hmm.
or do I buy food? So the consumer doesn't really have a choice in that situation. They've got to be served with something that's gonna help them. And we've seen that the energy prices, it was blamed on the Ukraine war in the beginning, okay, but we've seen it's just energy companies being exploitative from that. And just to build on that, the example with Project Margie, because I agree with you completely that it's about value, okay, and we talk about price and cost, but it's always about value. I never meant to start a nonprofit. That was not the world I came from, as you know. No, that wasn't my goal. But my goal was I want to help these people, and the economics to help these people meant we have to build a quality product that can offer them water, get rid of this hand pump, and offer them something that's a much better user experience for them. And then we have to run it, and we have to run it off water revenue. And we can only charge them a price that they are willing and able to pay. So we work backwards. Is we say, okay, we want to help these villages of 1,000 people or less because, again, ironically, because no one's serving them, because they're not profitable, they're being left behind. So that's why we choose those villages. And the economics dictate if it's 1,000 people and they can buy about 3,000 liters of water a day at 2 cents for a jerry can, our revenue is about $3 a day. And we had to build our business model on the back of that. And there's nothing the consumer can do about that.
Mm-hmm.
We could tell them, hey, we can't run this at 2 cents. It's got to be 5 cents.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help them, and won't help us as well because they're not going to buy the water. But that's where I find the challenge with consumer power. But having said that, sorry, my narrative is going to end in a minute. But you've seen it, for example, just as an example with the Gaza conflict, okay. And again, this is a shame because rightly or wrongly, companies were tainted with are they pro-Israel or not pro-Israel, and the consumer boycott against those companies was really loud. Starbucks was a big one that was hit. I know, for example, Carrefour UAE was hit.
Yes.
But consumers didn't understand that it was a franchisee run project in Israel. It was a franchisee project run here, two different organizations. But things like that. So consumers do have voting power with their feet, but some don't. Some need to heat or eat. How do we balance that?
Well, and I think, and again, not to be this positive poly around narrative and storytelling and alike, but that example that and multiple examples that you've just given is yet another example at that the way to change this is a cultural change through policy, government, media, and alike. Because the examples you've just given is once again polarizing. And while you put in a black and white scenario and an or scenario, we are keeping people disempowered around choice because it doesn't always come down to a cost. It doesn't have to be, and I'm not making I don't want to be seen as making a frivolous point around the real element of either choosing heating or eating, right? Because that's a real problem. But while we continue to say this narrative and advertise, choose one or the other, then people have to think in that way. So their decision making is shaped by that. But what if we start challenging that narrative when it doesn't have to be an
Yeah.
and or? And the example that you used with Project Margie, comes back to this concept of uh, we have a consumer and we have a customer. Project Margie. Our outcome is to serve 1 million plus people with sustainable water sources. That is the mechanism of what we do, and there's a cost associated to it. Um, but the other side of that is, and some people really buy into that. So our consumer gets the benefits, there's governmental benefits and alike. And from a philanthropist or an impact investment perspective, there's a number of value points in that alone, particularly if water, investing in water and sustainability is really important. But, and why I love Project Margie is it's not just about water. We know that every dollar invested into water is a 7x return
Yeah.
economically. We know that if we invest in water here, a little girl who never had the opportunity to be educated or have a trajectory for a really positive career now has one because she's not walking to a water facility, a dam or something like that. We also know that from a physical and psychological safety perspective, these little girls are no longer put in compromising positions. That economic benefit, a multifaceted benefit, appeals to such a broad range of people, right? So you've got your water and sustainable people, you've got your gender equality, people who believe in gender equality, you've got the socioeconomic elements that bring value. And where I think, and it's not a criticism of what we do at Project Margie, but I think a lot of people fall into this and or we just do this little piece
Yeah.
of the puzzle
Yeah.
and we don't sell everything.
Yeah.
So if you're investing or you're purchasing one product and you think it's just that value, then and we're not telling people what it is, then people only see the one thing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I just sort of wanted to come back to is when you were talking about, we talk about impact. There's a lot of noise
Yeah.
about impact and what companies should be doing, and it's good for the bottom line. And we talk about all this sort of lingo and all the buzzwords that we're using at the moment. But we don't, so we talk about it, we empower people, we excite people, we get them really passionate about it, but then we leave them hanging. And this is what needs to change, or this is the opportunity as well. It's like if I take a commercial element and, if you go and buy a bed, it's your first, or, one of your kids is moving out, it's first time they've moved out of home. They go to a shop. It's really exciting. They've just been sleeping in a single bed. They're going to a double bed. It's really luxe. You go there, you have this unbelievable experience. You're empowered, and you get the bed home, and all of a sudden you have this moment of reflection and say, I don't have sheets that fit. And then what's your experience now? You feel ripped off. You're disappointed. You've already had this idea of what that could mean for you. And now all of that has been degraded because you're now in your bedroom alone with a bed that's a double bed with a single bed sheet, and you feel ripped off. And so we need organizations, whether it's a consumer organization or a not-for-profit, to actually think about the consumer in a different way.
Yeah.
I.e., in that bed sheet example, if that salesperson had actually said, do you have sheets that fit a double bed, that would have got rid of the problem altogether and ensured that person had an unbelievable, valuable experience. The same thing with charities. We're talking about ROI. We've got the data to prove it. Everyone's, if you're not talking about it or if you're not doing it, it's like shame, guilt, and keeping you in a low energy state emotionally. But where we need to be better as impact organizations is selling that story, selling the value, selling the value proposition and the return on it, but then teaching people how. And I think this is where a massive opportunity is because people don't know how to implement. People don't know, and often philanthropy historically has been a give, set and forget. It's, I feel good, I've given, this is what it's going to do, fantastic, right? But it's changing if we look at all of the, financial models that, and I don't like to say disrupting as such, I like to say evolving, because I think disruption has happened since day one. in every industry. And it's really less around breaking it and more around creating an evolving product that suits today's consumer, because it's the evolving consumer that's changing and products need to keep up with them. So where I see the real opportunity for not-for-profits is, yes, sell the narrative, yes, tell them the incredible economic returns that come and also the social impact that it creates, but then provide them a roadmap of this is what you can do, or this is what you can do in businesses, whether it's template. Because, and I know as a business leader, and we have, share many friends in even the YPO community. The one things about leaders in in this world is we don't like to look bad. We don't know, there's ego at play, right? We don't want to not know the answers. And a lot of the time it's a very lonely road.
Yeah.
You've got people coming up to you constantly and asking you what the solution is. And, sometimes you're sitting in a very quiet office going, I've got no clue.
Yeah.
And I think, and we don't want to ask. We don't want people to know that we don't know the answer. And that's where courage comes in. We need to empower people to be courageous. We need to empower people to ask questions. And when they don't know when they don't have the answer that they want, challenge it. And then also we need to provide roadmaps and ways in which they can implement, because it's not about recreating the wheel. It's about collectively enhancing it and providing access to it.
I love that. I think that's a really good way to phrase it. Building on the point about evolution of models, you've been doing some cool stuff in the space of which I still don't understand, blockchain and stuff. Talk a bit about that. How okay, because I was going to use the word disrupting, but I won't. I'll use the word evolving.
You know that I'll pick you up on it, right?
How are you evolving this space? Some of the cool ideas you've had and have implemented.
Yeah. And look, and I think it comes back to my own curiosity and that customer centricity. So one of the things that I've always found perplexing is it's almost like you've got to grow into philanthropy. You've got to be successful enough, and then you can go into philanthropy and give away money and do these sort of things. And if we think about today's consumer, particularly, let's just go with millennials and Gen Zs, we know how they're buying. We know what their value sets are and the decisions that they're making. And so I always found it fascinating, this concept of impact doesn't have to be the destination, it's the starting point. So why are we waiting? Why are we waiting till we're, successful, or we've got enough means to be able to value contribution or be in service of others? And so I was always really interested in that from a consumer, and also saw a massive gap that no one's serving them. We're not creating products that allow them to lean in. And so given the technology background, the financial background that I've had the privilege of having, I really wanted to bring a younger demographic to the giving space. And to be able to do that, you have to speak their language. You have to be able to give them products that they can use that is in their native and digital language. And so there's a number of ways. So from a Women Making Waves perspective, we very much went into the NFT when the NFT craze was sort of in around how do we use digital art and digital memberships to create value, which in turn funded charities. And so that mechanism of providing a service, because we know that that's what people want. People also want community and values aligned community. So rather than leading with outcome of giving charities money so that they don't have to spend 25% of their OPEX or funding dollars, on OPEX rather, what if we could create a reoccurring revenue stream that allowed charities to not have to worry about fundraising? If we could take that burden away from them, what would it mean for the impact that they can create in what they do best? When we have in our businesses, if we want to market something, we don't get the guy from finance to do it.
Yeah.
We find an expert to do it. And that's what we wanted to do with charity. So I think blockchains and emerging technologies are really, really interesting space for this. One, because it's where the world's going. Two, it gives us really interesting data points. And three, we can create models that can be productized and that can give consumers exactly what they want. And it doesn't have to just be with an impact lens, as in leading with impact. The outcome can be impact, but you're still serving a customer. And so that was sort of one element. The other thing that I really love is this collective funding.
Mm-hmm.
So actually bringing through the concept, and let's take the water example. So looking at the economic return on a water charity or not-for-profit, what does that mean for many, many types of philanthropic investors or impact investors? So if we think about gender, so I spoke a little earlier around what that means for gender. If we talk about what water actually does for communities and what access that is. If we look at it from a government perspective around if you solve the water crisis, what does that do for our medical systems? What does it do for the backlog around that and the return for them? So I like this idea of actually matching values aligned investors to bigger causes. So rather than having this siloed approach
Mm-hmm.
of I'm as an individual investing into this, what if we changed that and opened it up and said we get a collective together that all value this, but there's multifaceted elements of that. So I don't need another investor that values exactly the same thing as I do. I need someone that values this element of this collective
Yeah.
project. And then therefore we collect bigger pools of money, we can create bigger impact and solve everyone's needs within that ecosystem. So I love that sort of, and it's no different to crowdfunding a startup.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that I really love is this tokenized membership model.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking a lot about in the endowment legacy fund. So how we create different financial models. And I'm not talking about a financial product. I'm talking about a legacy or a long-term investment that gives back based on a value set and financial return that might not necessarily come back into your pocket, right? So if we take a sort of philanthropic mentality of donate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Set and forget, it's a one-off.
Yeah.
So many high net worths or investors or anyone really has a mindset of where they're putting that allocation of their wealth management or wealth fund. So that's already invested.
Mm-hmm.
So it can have multiple benefits to that person. So if you are a registered charity and they're giving to a charity, you could have a tax benefit at a government or a taxation perspective based on your domicile. You can also create value, and I've just lost my train of thought with that. But you'll have to cut this bit. Damn it. That's jet lag.
We'll keep it in.
Yeah. What was I talking about?
About different financial models and the endowment, and he says not a financial product, it's a financial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Cut. Go again. So what I love about it is looking at different financial models. So we're talking about an endowment or legacy fund.
Yeah.
So where we have investors who have traditionally looked at philanthropy, and it's been a one-off, it's already included in their annual budget. That's a one-off set and forget. They might use it as something that is a benefit from a taxation perspective or whatever that looks like for them. But there's an allocation of money. And so it's never really a return on investment financially, as in they're getting dividends each year like you would a commercial product. But that money can actually have a long-term effect
Yes.
if created into a impact bond or a function or a vehicle that has perpetuity that allows the upside of that investment to be able to create sustainable good. And I think that's where there's a really nice opportunity because people know that language if they're investors as well. And it comes back to sort of speaking the language and getting the value that they need out of where they're putting their money.
Yeah. Perfect, because that's a great way that I can not put a direct plug about the Project Margie.
I was leading the horse to water. So
Project Margie Everflow Endowment Fund, which people can always contact me to find out more about. But you said something there, which I'll raise, and we can make that the last thing to close on. You said that typically people want to wait till they're successful to give to charities, which yes has been the case, and I really like what you're trying to do is to sort of democratize it and bring a younger demographic into this and make it. But to that point, give to charities when you're successful. How do you define success?
It's great. It's like, how do you define impact? It's so subjective and it's so personal, right? So, um, I actually learnt a really valuable lesson with my time with my mentor and someone who we both know very well. And that was, I used to say, when he would say to me, that's a lot, like, he would say something and I would be like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And he's like, well, to who? And I was like, wow, there's such a bias based on our own background. I come from very humble beginnings. That was a huge amount of money to me. So to answer your question with regards to what does success look like, it's hugely personal, and how we spend our money, again, comes back to value set. And it's why people are now valuing experiences over material product.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one. For me, I've redefined success over the last year, and that's about being happy,
Sure. That's why I asked it.
which I'm loving. And the things that I'm really values aligned to and investing into is impact. And when I define impact, it's about multi-return for every stakeholder and changing this narrative of scarcity. Because I think using that example of, and the question you just asked me, we talk about getting to a certain age or a destination of then we're allowed to have permission to do something. And again, we are that permission. We can guide that. There's no rule book that says you get to this age or this dollar amount to say that you can do that. And what I think is really interesting is if you look at kids, if you look at, 0 to 7, let's say, there is not a moment where a child almost consciously thinks about not sharing or not giving. We're actually born in an in-service mentality. And then as a construct, we get brought into this society of scarcity and fear, where you kind of have to watch your back. You have to look after yourself. It's about you, blah, blah, blah. And during this phase, we work hard, we, play hard, we do what we think is the right decisions to get to a destination to give us freedom again or to live our lives a certain way. But there's that hard kind of yards in the middle. And that's where I think it's fascinating, because who set those rules? And why are we abiding by them and not actually questioning them? And that's where I think there's a massive opportunity.
I know that's where you made a conscious shift in your own mindset.
Totally.
Prioritize yourself, prioritize happiness.
Yeah.
Which I think
You
that
can only talk about that if you've lived and breathed it, right? Like it's, there has to be integrity with that. And if I had sat here, and you've seen me through many phases of my career, if I'd sat here 8 years ago, this narrative would be very different. This conversation would be different, because I was different in the way that I saw things. And I was in this mentality of something had to come at a cost. If I wanted to be successful or drive profitability, if I wanted to build extraordinary organizations, it had to come at a cost of either my own personal cost, a happiness cost, or a value cost. And I woke up one day and I was like, that's bullshit. It's bullshit. Why do I ever want to compromise on my values? And in return, what I've seen in my own experience, I'm not saying this is a, right for everyone, but I have been more financially successful since I made the shift. And that's if my experiences, good, bad, and indifferent, and me sharing them can make other people see and have courage to do the same, then I'll go on every single podcast in the world to do so. And you know how much I hate them.
Well, hey, that's a lovely place to end on. Thanks for this discussion. We'll have you back on in another 6 months. Push some more buttons. Get people talking about this. Is the purpose of why I started. This is what I want people to do. Is there's no right or wrong in this. There's just different perspectives, and you've given us a really good, valuable, different perspective as well for people to think about this. And just I would sum it up as about thinking about something greater than yourselves. How can you give back? How can you help? And and again, like success, like happiness, there's different ways to do it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. But I think the more we discuss it, we can just understand that it's something people can discuss, people can access. and it's not just this rat race of life, work as much as you can, earn as much as you can,
Yeah.
and yeah.
And also, if I can leave with the point of challenge the scarcity mentality. It doesn't have to be like that. And I think the more that we encourage people to live in a world of abundance and think about a mindset of abundance, um, and also changing the narrative on charity, it's kind of devalued in so many ways, and we need to change that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time and your support.
Always.
Thank you.